Now, it's my great pleasure to welcome Jamie Wallace. Jamie joined WilkinsonEyre in 2022, bringing over 15 years of experience working on significant international projects around the world. Oh, thank you, Jamie.
Hello. Hi, everybody. It's really amazing to be here, and thank you to Natia, Mariam, and Gavansa for organizing such an incredible event. I love coming to Tbilisi. It's definitely one of my favorite cities in the world. The energy, the optimism, and this kind of incredible culture that you experience when you walk around the city is just so exciting to be here. For those of you that don't know, WilkinsonEyre was founded around 40 years ago by Jim Eyre and Chris Wilkinson. And the genesis of our practice is very much their interest in engineering and geometry. So when they started, they didn't want to make buildings where they kind of imagined a form and then attempted to post-rationalize it with a structural solution. They were very much interested in how you can derive architecture out of an understanding of structures, engineering, and geometry, how that can kind of drive the form and the experience of the building. And I think if you kind of move forward 40 years to today, obviously the practice has evolved quite a lot. We're now 250 people in 3 offices around the world. Those original ideas are still very much evident in the buildings that we make today. This kind of interest in how materials meet each other, in how buildings stand up, in how through the application of geometry to a site you can amplify and explore the kind of specific characteristics of a place. And so, we make buildings all different types and different scales and all over the world, but today I wanted to talk to you about our transformational projects. So projects where we reuse existing structures, projects where we're involved in the regeneration of existing pieces of cities. And I think these ones are interesting because they really kind of, all those ideas that I just talked about, site, geometry, engineering, are really evident, I think, in these projects. So I'll run you through a few of them, and hopefully some of the ideas and the strategies that we employed and the way that we work will become evident. So the first project is called Magna in a city called Sheffield, which is in the north of England. Sheffield is a very interesting place. It was a place for the production of steel historically in the UK. Huge amount of steel was produced there. But as economics change, this industry becomes redundant and the city is left with an enormous amount of kind of redundant buildings and spaces. And so around the turn of the millennium, around 2000, the city government asked us to be involved with the transformation of one of these historic buildings into a museum of industrial history. The idea was to kind of illustrate and tell the story of this great legacy of the city. The historic buildings were amazing. When you walk around, the kind of drama of these incredible structures, it's just completely exciting to be there, and we didn't want to kind of lose that through the way that we intervened in the building. The structures were a series of long-span sheds that ran parallel to each other across the site. A very pragmatic type of building. It just literally was following the kind of production processes of steel. Internally, those spaces were also very exciting. If you look down the sheds, you get these very long views. If you look across, you get this kind of like filtered views through the structure. And the other important thing about this was that there wasn't very much money for it. And so our kind of idea was, instead of attempting to wrap the buildings, to put a new envelope over them and create kind of sealed environments within, we would put buildings inside it. And between those would string a series of walkways. And this was a kind of efficient way of intervening. And so those kind of interventions themselves became compositions with those existing structures, the spaces around them as well as the spaces within, and the walkways involved interacting with the historic structure. So that itself, the old building became a kind of primary artifact within the museum narrative. Externally, we wanted to demonstrate that this building's use had been changed, but we also didn't want to kind of lose the character that was there. So simple, almost graphical geometric forms, single colors that identify this change of use, that don't change the complexity of this kind of movement between inside and outside. And also because there wasn't much money, also lighting became one of our kind of primary materials, so we could actually change the character very easily through the way that we lit the building. It could become a beacon for the city. We could explore the drama of casting shadows through the old structures. This project, another adaptive reuse of a kind of industrial heritage, was gas holders. This is in London, just next to King's Cross Station. It's kind of similar story in a way, which is this, one of the stories of the 20th century in Britain, the kind of post-industrial industry moving out to other places in the world. This site behind the railway station was a place where goods would land from around the country, but also where goods would be collected that were manufactured in the UK, in London, and be shipped out to the rest of the country. It's a kind of island site surrounded by railway lines, canals, and all of these kinds of infrastructure. We were asked by the developer that bought the whole site to create some high-end residential buildings on the site that you see here, where this kind of old gas holder structure. And this itself was a very interesting kind of piece of infrastructure. Inside, historically, would have been these basically big balloons that they would have filled with gas, and then as the city uses the gas, it's taken out of there. But we were left with the series of frames. We persuaded them to keep the frames because we felt it could add value to the building. And our design strategy was very much a journey through the historic structures. So you were constantly kind of interacting with them. So you see this diagram on the bottom. We created a centralized courtyard, and then we inserted 3 residential kind of drum buildings within each of the structures that are then linked together by bridges at different levels, and the balconies again. So as you wander through this building, you kind of feel the presence of these old structures continuously. And there you see this kind of central courtyard in the middle and the 3 drums. The third project, adaptive reuse project that I want to talk about, is Batumi Power Station that we finished, that opened 2 years ago. This was a decade in the making. The building was an old power station, coal-fired power station in West London, that we were asked to transform into a truly mixed-use building. I think it's around 250,000 meters squared altogether. Mixed-use retail, head European office for Apple, high-end residential apartments, cinema, event space, etc., etc., etc. And this historic building was designed by a man called Giles Gilbert Scott, who he also designed, which you may know, the red telephone box, which is one of the kind of icons of Britain. And we won this project through competition, and one of the reasons was we've worked on one of his other buildings in Cambridge before, adapting it into a library. So of course, as the city grew, you can't really have a coal-fired power station in the center of the city, so the building became redundant, but it was still left with these kind of incredible monuments, in a way, to that kind of legacy. It was a ruin when we received it, and many people had actually tried to turn this into things before, including Chelsea Football Club's stadium. The master plan for the site involved you see where it says phase 2, this is the actual adaptation of the power station and a series of gardens and landscapes and public spaces around it. And then a whole bunch of residential and office buildings. Phase 1, 3, and 4 have been built. 5, 6, and 7 are yet to be built. And actually this project has changed the geography of the city, where it was the periphery. It's now very much the center of, or one of the centers of London. You have the American embassy there, you have offices of various companies, including Apple and Foster's as well. So yeah, the kind of impact that you can have through a project like this on a city like London is quite phenomenal. So this is a section through the building. You see the green, so the original building had 2 turbine halls, one built in the 1930s, one built in the 1950s. So these turbine halls and the areas between it became effectively a high-end shopping mall. The purple areas are residential apartments on the base, inserted into the historic building. On the top, new kind of glass boxes that sit on top of it. The blue is office. The yellow is kind of entertainment, including a glass lift that we put in one of the chimneys that kind of pops out the top. And that's the finished building when it opened 2 years ago. One of the other kind of critical ideas and the reasons that we won this competition was our interest in the chimney structures. And not only are they a kind of icon for the city, you see them from really quite far away, but we wanted you to feel the presence of those as you entered the building. So we made voids, we cut holes and windows and other kind of forms, including circulation that goes up through them. So you're continuously feeling the presence of this within the kind of more commercial environment inside the building. And that's what it's like when you pop out the top. Unlike maybe the gas holders or Magna, here we were interested in how the new and the old actually are opposed to each other. We allowed them to kind of be read very much as kind of different elements. I think maybe in Magna and the gas holders, it was more about a composition, a harmony between the two. So these are the main entrances on the river side and on the city side. When you enter the building, you see right through. We cut these large voids. You feel the masonry and these lightweight steel structures that support that. This is the 1930s. The 1930s turbine hall, which is now retail environment. This is the 1950s. And actually it's very interesting because you can read the history of Britain in these two environments. From the 30s, it was built out of this terracotta bespoke tiling, the entire turbine hall, even though it was a kind of dirty production place, whereas in the 1950s, it was a much kind of cheaper intervention. So there's a kind of optimism of Britain in the 1930s, and then this kind of realization of where we are and what we need to do in the 1950s. And in some ways, our retail environment responded to that. So if that was adaptive reuse, this is regeneration. The first project was a project that really gave us a kind of, put us on the map in terms of doing bridges. It's Millennium Bridge, also built around the year 2000, linking two cities, Gateshead on the left, Newcastle on the right. Again, historically, Gateshead, an industrial location, the industry moves out, it becomes a post-industrial site and they don't know what to do with it. Here, Gateshead City Council decided culture was the answer and connecting to Newcastle. Our idea for the bridge was a double-arched structure held together in tension. And what we wanted to do was not just make this kind of connection across the river, we wanted to make a piece of theater. And the way that we did that was, instead of the normal ways that bridges open, we decided to make it rotate on its axis. So when a boat enters, this entire two arch structures and the tension cables rotate and allow a bridge to travel under it. And this itself became, you can see that kind of movement on the top right. So this process of a boat entering, the bridge rotating, becomes this kind of theatrical moment in the daily life of the city. And like many of our buildings, it became a kind of icon of this region. So they put it on the money, they put it on the stamps, you know. Crown Plaza in Sydney, a kind of strange one in a way to talk about in terms of regeneration, but the site is very, very similar. It was a series of wharfs, but in an incredibly prime location next to the Harbour Bridge, next to the Opera House, and the Crown Group asked us to make them a hotel. And in this situation, where there was nothing there at the moment, we decided that this needed to be two things. One, an icon representative of Sydney, and secondly, it also needed to touch the ground in a way that the city could enter it. It could feel its presence. It wasn't just a tower sat on a plinth with its back facing the city. The design became about this slightly twisted geometry in homage, let's say, to the Opera House, but also to maximize the amount of rooms that would have views of the Harbour Bridge and views of the Opera House. And that's it, kind of finished, and since it's been finished, many other buildings have been constructed, are under construction in this location of Sydney. And there you kind of feel how we allowed the more public-facing uses of a hotel to kind of colonize the surrounding public spaces, to make them feel a part of the city, and to make people feel like they were welcome to enter the environment. Gardens by the Bay, very similar to Sydney, a large area of Singapore. The government wanted to create a major tourist destination. This project we made with a company called Grant Associates, landscape architects. And since it's finished, you probably know the 3 towers with this kind of bridge, Marina Bay Sands, which is right next to it. But since this project was finished, it's added a day onto everybody's itinerary in Singapore. So you can imagine the kind of GDP impact for a country that something like that can have. So the original site. So the idea, these are some of Chris's original drawings. The idea here was to create these 2 biomes. Inside, they would tell the story of Southeast Asian landscapes, but the way that we would moderate those climates, those internal climates, would be entirely self-sufficient. So there is an energy center that uses biomass generated by the surrounding landscapes. This is the hot air from inside is pulled out through something that have been named after we finished, super trees that I'll show you later. There are shading devices that follow the path of the sun, so it's entirely kind of self-sufficient in terms of energy. Here you get a sense of the internal environment and the walkways that we introduced to create this kind of drama. And these were the trees that pull that hot air out of the biomes. And then finally, this is another regenerative project. This was the basketball arena that we made for the 2012 Olympics in London. This site was on the edge of London, East London. London won the Olympics partially on the back of an idea that by spending all of this money, we would bring this entire site back into the realm of the city. We could build new housing on it in legacy mode. We would create a massive new public park. We would create new gardens and landscapes and public facilities. Here you see the building in Olympic mode, so on facing the kind of public Olympic site, and behind it all of the obviously logistics that you need to actually run a major sporting event. And the building itself was designed to be temporary. It was not going to be one of the buildings like Zaha's building that would stay on the site. It was a building that needed to just exist during Olympic mode and then needed to be demolished. So we didn't want to create something that was heavy in carbon. We wanted to create something that was as light as possible, while still being able to retain a 12,000 seat event space for basketball without any columns in it. So the idea here was to use proprietary systems. We use steel structures that are generally used for industrial kind of farming buildings, and then we adapted them slightly to create this kind of patterned geometry on the facade. We wrapped it in a vacuumed plastic, and then we used lighting to kind of lift the identity and the image of that. And then post-Olympics, the building, there were no welds in this entire steel structure. It was all done with bolts. So after the Olympics, it was all dismantled and all the pieces were reused in other buildings around the country. And that's it. Thank you.